Every now and then, I do a video about a myth or set of ideas that I see circulating among football fans that seem to have become pervasive and start to irritate me. If you're a long-time subscriber, you'll be used to this type of video by now, and given that there's no football on our screens at the moment, now seemed like a good time to ramp up the number of videos like this that I make. Today's video is all about Pep Guardiola, the bald-headed footballing idealist who has won trophies relentlessly since moving into first-team management in 2008. Before I get up on my soapbox, I'll first lay out some of the arguments that you may have heard made against the current Manchester City boss over the years. The criticisms of Guardiola tend to be that he isn't actually a great football manager, that he buys his success, any manager will be able to replicate his success with the various sets of players that he has had, or that he wouldn't be able to succeed without brilliant players or vast resources at his disposal. Those are a selection of different arguments, albeit with considerable overlap, but I'll do my best to try and pick the bones out of each of them and see how much weight they really hold. We'll start with the idea that Guardiola inherited such a tremendously gifted group of players at Barcelona that even Ian Dowie could have guided them to the sextuple, and any manager worth their salt would have walked to multiple La Liga and Champions League successes with that side. I think, or at least hope, that it's widely understood that great teams are not created in an instant, but over time, through coaching, recruitment, and a multitude of other factors. If the Barcelona side that Guardiola inherited in 2008 really was so awe-inspiringly brilliant that they were destined to win all in their wake, surely they ought to have been in irresistible form prior to his arrival. Well, let's take a look. The Barcelona side in the 2007-08 season, the year before Pep took over, finished third in La Liga, a whopping 10 points behind Villarreal in second, and 18 points behind Real Madrid, one of the biggest gaps between the two teams in the modern era. In fact, the season before Guardiola took over at the Camp Nou, Barca didn't win a single trophy. Having only just finished within the Champions League places in La Liga, 3 points ahead of 5th place Sevilla, Frank Rijkaard's side went out to Valencia in the semi-finals of the Copa del Rey and were beaten by Manchester United in the semi-finals of the Champions League. So far, not so good. The previous season, Barca finished second, very narrowly missing out on the La Liga title to Real Madrid, and the only trophy they won was the season-opening Spanish Super Cup. The Catalan Giants were beaten by Getafe in the semi-finals of the Copa del Rey and Liverpool in the round of 16 in the Champions League. Looking over a broader time frame, between the 1999-2000 campaign and the 2007-08 season before Guardiola took charge, Barcelona won just 2 La Liga titles from a possible 9, twice finishing 4th and once finishing as low as 6th. What's more, in the entire history of the European Cup/Champions League, going back to the mid-1950s, Barcelona had only won the competition twice, once in 1992 and once in 2006. Before I go on, let me be absolutely clear on one thing. I am not saying Barcelona didn't have a fantastic squad in 2008. The likes of Xavi, Puyol, Iniesta, Deco, Ronaldinho, Henry, and of course a once-in-a-generational talent like Lionel Messi are all incredible footballers, but there are 2 points worth making here. One is that we look back on some of those players through the lens of the players they became and what they went on to achieve, rather than through the lens of the players they were and what they had achieved when Pep Guardiola was handed the top job at Barca in 2008. It's easy to look back, for example, at Gerard Piqué and Sergio Busquets and say, well, Guardiola had 2 of the finest players of the last 20 years in their respective positions. If you took a step back though, you'd see that Sergio Busquets was sitting around in the Barca B team when Pep arrived and had never played a first team game, whilst Piqué was signed by Pep in 2008 for just €5 million, having failed to establish himself at Manchester United. Whilst Lionel Messi was a born football player and would have lit up the world game even under the tutelage of Alan Pardew for his entire career, I don't think it's a given that he would have had the career he has had without the influence of Pep Guardiola at a young age. The season before Pep Guardiola arrived, Messi had scored 16 goals. In Pep's debut campaign, Messi scored 38 goals, winning his first Ballon d'Or. In Pep's second season, he moved Messi in from the right to a more central role, and the Argentine scored 47 goals, winning his second Ballon d'Or. In 2012, the year Pep Guardiola left Barcelona, Messi set an all-time record for the most number of goals, scored both during a league season and over the course of a calendar year, receiving his 4th consecutive Ballon d'Or. Well, look at the players he signed, you might say. Okay? Seydou Keita, Gerard Piqué, Pinto, Martin Caceres, Dani Alves, Alexander Hleb, and Enrique. In his debut campaign, Barcelona had a net spend of less than 40 million euros. What's more, if you would have asked most people in the summer of 2008 to name Barcelona's best player, I suspect most would have said Ronaldinho, unless they really took an interest in watching the team, in which case they might have said Messi, but certainly, first or second, they would have said Ronaldinho. Selling Ronaldinho, a Ballon d'Or winning Barcelona legend, was not a universally popular decision at the time. I'm not sure there's another manager in world football who willingly sells Ronaldinho in his first season in senior management, but that's what Pep did, and it proved to be a masterstroke. Deco was another favourite at the Camp Nou who was shown the exit door in Pep's first summer in charge, meanwhile Lilian Thuram retired. There were plenty of people who looked at Barcelona in the summer of 2008 and said, this team has finished 18 points behind Real Madrid and looks weaker now. Barca subsequently won every single competition they entered. Across 4 seasons managing his boyhood club, Guardiola won La Liga 3 times, the Champions League twice, the Copa del Rey twice, and 7 other trophies, averaging 3.5 trophies per season. It's worth reminding you that Barca won nothing of note for 2 seasons before he took charge of the side, and had just finished much further behind Real Madrid than Getafe currently are behind either Barcelona or Real Madrid in the La Liga table. You may remember about an hour ago now, I said that there are 2 points worth making in regards to the fact that Barcelona had some very good players, but trophies hadn't been a guarantee in the previous years. The second and much belated point is that good players do not ensure success. They help, of course, in fact, it's impossible to win anything without some good footballers, but there have been countless sides who have assembled excellent playing squads and underachieved. Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima spent 4.5 years at Real Madrid, during which time he played alongside the likes of Iker Casillas, Roberto Carlos, Zinedine Zidane, Luis Figo, David Beckham and Raul, yet he won just 1 La Liga title, no Copa del Rey, and never won the Champions League. And whilst Guardiola didn't actually spend a fortune at the Camp Nou, by the same token, spending vast sums doesn't ensure vast success. Just ask Manchester United since Sir Alex Ferguson left, or indeed that Real Madrid team in the early 2000s. Now, when Guardiola joined Bayern Munich following a 12-month sabbatical, he did inherit a very successful team. Under Jupp Heynckes the previous season, Bayern had won a remarkable treble. Some people like to point to the fact that Guardiola never won a Champions League at Bayern, presumably as evidence that he isn't a great manager or underachieved in Bavaria, so it's worth talking about that for a bit. I could mention the fact that if you look at teams who lost their managers the summers after winning the Champions League, they tend to badly struggle, but that would be too easy a point. Bayern's Champions League win in 2013 was their first in the competition since 2001, and their treble in the 2012-13 season was actually their first Bundesliga title in 3 seasons. The club didn't win a trophy in the 2011-12 campaign, and they finished 3rd in the Bundesliga, behind Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen, in the 2010-11 season. Treble seasons were far from the norm in Bavaria then, and league titles were far from a given. During his 3 seasons at the Allianz Arena, Guardiola won 3 Bundesliga titles, comfortably keeping Borussia Dortmund at arm's length unlike some of his predecessors. Bayern won the DFB Pokal twice, but couldn't get their hands on the Champions League, reaching the semi-finals but terminating their run there in every one of Pep's seasons in charge. Failure to win the Champions League at Bayern is a mark against Guardiola, no doubt, and I think it's a valid criticism. However, it would take an incredibly harsh critic to say his time at Bayern Munich overall wasn't still a success. If I come next to the allegation that Pep has bought all of his success, or that he is a cheque-book manager, which is an expression I've seen used, I think that's a very English-centric idea based solely on his time at Manchester City. As far as I know, Barcelona only signed 2 40 million euro plus players during Pep's time in Catalonia, Zlatan Ibrahimovic and David Villa. Ibrahimovic only spent a season in the Barca first team, whilst Villa arrived halfway through the Spaniard's time at the club and proved to be a very useful addition. I don't believe Bayern made a single 40 million euro plus signing during Guardiola's time at the helm, and whilst they did spend some significant fees, certainly none that really turned any heads. At Man City, Guardiola has loosened the purse strings significantly. Not in terms of any marquee signings, Manchester United, Liverpool and Chelsea have all made bigger money signings than Guardiola since he arrived in England, but just across his time at the club. Over £170 million was spent in Guardiola's first season in charge, followed by almost £270 million during his second season, £63 million last season, and £133 million this season. Obviously, those figures are a bit misleading, since that is only transfer expenditure. In the 2018-19 season, for example, the Citizens actually had a positive net spend of over £6 million. But whichever way you look at it, Man City have spent an awful lot of money under Pep Guardiola. If one were to beg the question, would Man City be as good without the significant outlay on signings like Riyad Mahrez, Bernardo Silva and Ederson, the answer is an unequivocal no, and anyone who thinks otherwise would be deluding themselves. By the same token, however, would Liverpool be as good without Sadio Mane, Virgil van Dijk and Alisson? Well, we recently saw how they struggled just without Alisson, so the answer to that is also very obviously not. If you are the manager of an elite club, you will be handed vast resources. The question is how well you distribute those funds and how well those players gel with the rest of your team. So many people were willing Pep Guardiola to fail in his first season at Man City and seemed to revel in the club failing to win the Premier League title. There were columnists and sports reporters claiming the Spaniard was living in dreamland if he thought he could stick to his principles and succeed in the Premier League. The league is too quick, too physical. There are no eyeballs or Alaveses in the Premier League, Pep. Well, over the next 2 seasons, if anything, Guardiola became even more of a purist. He strengthened his team, no doubt, and they grew into his ideals, winning consecutive Premier League titles, numerous domestic honours, and amassing a ridiculous total of 198 points over the course of 2 seasons. That probably ought to have silenced some of his critics, but of course in recent years, changing your mind in light of new evidence has become a crime punishable by death in some people's minds, preferring instead to double down on the position and keep digging until they're so deep in their own nonsense they can no longer hear or see anything else. Lastly, there is the claim that Guardiola wouldn't be able to take over at, say, Swindon Town and turn them into a top-half Premier League team, and I think that's probably true. I think it's quite possible that Pep Guardiola wouldn't have been able to do the job that Chris Wilder has done at Sheffield United. Does that make Chris Wilder a better manager than Pep Guardiola? Well, it depends on your criteria. Equally, I don't think that Chris Wilder could have done the job that Pep Guardiola has done at Barcelona, Bayern Munich or Manchester City. They are different tradesmen for different jobs. Saying that Guardiola wouldn't be a good manager at non-league level is a bit like saying the Uber CEO wouldn't make a very good Uber driver. Well, you might well be correct, but it isn't really relevant. They're essentially different jobs with different roles and different expectations. It is true that Pep Guardiola inherited some brilliant players at Barcelona, it's true that he didn't win the Champions League at Bayern Munich, and it's true that he has spent a fortune at Manchester City. It is also true that he made and developed more great players than he bought or inherited at Barcelona, he made Bayern unstoppable in the Bundesliga, and he has achieved things at Manchester City never seen before in the English game. No manager could take over at a League 2 side in 2020 with a shoestring budget and lead them to an unbeaten season in the Premier League whilst winning all the domestic and continental trophies in the process. Not Alex Ferguson, not Brian Clough, not Herbert Chapman. It just isn't possible. To say Pep wouldn't win anything without great players or without spending money is actually probably true, but nor would anyone else. The Man City boss does not operate in isolation, others have inherited great teams or deep pockets, but few, if any, have done what Guardiola has done. There are those who sometimes say I'm biased in terms of certain players, teams or managers. Some of them are mad conspiracy theorists, but no doubt some of them are right. I am biased. We all are. Personally, I'm a footballing purist. I love the way that Pep Guardiola teams play. I think it's a joy to watch, and there's no team in world football who I'd rather watch over the last few years than them. Some people find the way Pep's teams play boring. Those are the same people who would turn off Bach or Bob Dylan to listen to Coldplay, but I digress. The point is we all have styles, preferences, and subsequent biases. I subjectively am a huge fan of Pep Guardiola and the way in which his teams try to play the game, but I objectively believe that he is one of the greatest managers to have ever lived, and that's why in this video, up to this point, I haven't really mentioned the style or beauty of Pep's teams play, only the trophies and results. That's it for today's video. There's a lot more I could say, but people would complain that the video would be too long, and this video needs to be up by Monday morning, and I should probably do something other than work this weekend, even if we can barely leave our houses now. I hope you're all fit, healthy, and staying safe. Thank you all for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it, and whether you agree with me or not, do make sure to hit the like button if you did. Oh, and obviously, go ahead and subscribe to HITC Sevens if you'd like to see more from me in the future.